Me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome to On the Money. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about why this military conflict between Russia and Ukraine is fast developing into an economic conflict between Russia and the West, including the UK. The most obvious aspects of war, of course, are the military battles and the heartbreaking humanitarian fallout. Media coverage is rightly focused on that. But war involves economic weapons and economic fallout too, even for those far away from the military conflict. East-West war, the implications for you. On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, efforts to broker an immediate ceasefire are currently underway, with delegations from Ukraine and Russia meeting in Belarus. Kiev hopes that the talks will also lead to the withdrawal of Russian forces from the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked the European Union as well to fast-track Ukraine's membership application.
We
address the European Union to admit Ukraine immediately according to the new special procedure. We are grateful to the partners that they stand with us, but our goal is to be with all Europeans, and, most importantly, to be equal. I'm sure that's fair. I'm sure we deserved it. I'm sure it is possible.
There are new reports of heavy shelling in the eastern city of Donesk as Russian troops try to advance on the capital. The UK Ministry of Defence says the bulk of Russia's ground forces are about 18 miles north of Kiev. Satellite images taken yesterday show a huge military convoy heading towards the capital city. The Russian news agency Interfax claims 2 towns in the southeast of the country have been captured. Human rights groups are condemning Russia's reported use of cluster bombs on a preschool in eastern Ukraine. 3 people, including a child, were killed at a nursery and a kindergarten near the city of Kharkiv. Another child was injured in the attack. Amnesty International says the use of cluster munitions in a civilian area may constitute a war crime. Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Gonchakaro told GB News the country needs help protecting its airspace.
We're not looking for boots on our ground. We are ready to fight ourselves. And we don't ask British people, American people to fight for us, but we ask you to help us to protect the skies, because the Russians are using aircrafts and missiles to hit residential houses, kindergartens, hospitals, schools.
The UN says 500,000 people have fled Ukraine since the incursion. It follows news that Britain's likely to follow the EU's lead in taking Ukrainian refugees for the next 3 years. Well, the policy is due to be reviewed in the coming days. Boris Johnson has already announced that immediate family members can join Ukrainians currently living in the UK. The Kremlin says President Putin ordered Russia's nuclear deterrent to be on high alert as a result of comments by the British Foreign Secretary. Russia's blaming what it describes as absolutely unacceptable remarks by Liz Truss for the escalation. It's not clear which statements Moscow is referring to. Allies say she's not said anything that would warrant such a response. Meanwhile, Liz Truss is going to address the Commons this afternoon about sanctions against Russia. Britain has joined the US and the EU in banning financial transactions with the Russian Central Bank, the Finance Ministry and the Wealth Fund. That's effectively cut Moscow off from Western financial markets. The government's also fast-tracking legislation to stop dirty money being laundered through the UK's property market. Russia's central bank has more than doubled its key interest rate to what is now an unprecedented 20%. It's trying to shore up the ruble, its currency, which has now fallen to an all-time low against the dollar after sanctions were imposed against Moscow. They include the blocking of some Russian banks from the international banking system SWIFT. Fears over energy supplies have seen an oil price soar as a result of the conflict. Petrol in the UK has reached record highs, with the average price hitting £1.51 for the first time. The cost of diesel is also at unprecedented levels. Now, in other news, commuters here are facing the biggest hike in fares in nearly a decade. Ticket prices in England and Wales are increasing by 3.8%. That follows a similar rise in Scottish rail travel costs last month. COVID restrictions have been eased in Scotland. Mandatory vaccine passports for nightclubs, concerts and football matches have been scrapped, and students and teachers no longer have to wear masks in the classroom. They do still have to be worn in communal areas, and distancing rules will apply. 9 people have died and tens of thousands have been evacuated from their homes after heavy rain brought flooding to Australia's east coast. The Brisbane River in Queensland capital has peaked, but 4 people are still missing. Parts of the city remain underwater. Weather warnings say the flash flooding remains a serious risk in northern New South Wales. You're now up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Let's return, though, now to Liam for On the Money.
And coming up on The Money today on GB News TV and DAB Plus digital radio, we're talking Russia-Ukraine. Not so much the military conflict during this hour, but the economic standoff instead. A financial and commercial conflict that's not only Russia versus Ukraine, but Russia against the West. Energy prices are soaring as oil spikes once again above $100 a barrel. What does that mean for your petrol, diesel and household energy bills? And how are British companies getting on, the manufacturers and steel makers who use huge amounts of energy and employ countless numbers of people, not least across those red wall constituencies Boris Johnson must retain to stay in office. As ever, I want your questions, opinions, suggestions. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. So stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. You're on the money. Now, media attention is focused, rightly, on the military and humanitarian aspects of this Russia-Ukraine conflict. But money and finance are a big part of the story. Not the source of dramatic film footage, no, but hugely important nonetheless. For this is now not just a military, but an economic war as well. Not just between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and the West. And that has consequences for all of us. Protesters across Europe have called for the West to throw Russia out of the international banking system known as SWIFT in a bid to cripple Putin's economy. The UK, US and Germany have now said that will happen. But that raises serious questions. Will Western Europe still be able to buy energy from Russia, which supplies 10% of the world's oil and 40% of Western Europe's gas? Some Western security sources privately warn excluding Moscow from SWIFT could spark a backlash, with Russia and China working together to set up a new global payment system that could then dominate Asia. And if Moscow has no skin in the game, sources say, SWIFT could then be vulnerable to Russian cyber attacks, which could seriously harm the Western economies. At the centre of this economic war, though, is energy, where China is also heavily involved. Back in 2019, Moscow and Beijing opened a brand new gas pipeline running from Russia to China, so Putin can keep selling Russian gas even if Europe imposes energy sanctions. The Russian president's been pivoting east since he took office more than 20 years ago, collaborating with China to diversify away from the West as a market for Russian oil and gas. Until quite recently, all Russian energy pipelines headed west to Europe. But the 3,000-kilometre Power of Siberia pipeline to China is now operational, and it runs alongside the first Russia-China oil pipeline, which opened in 2012. As Russia and China cement these energy ties and oil and gas prices spike, that raises big questions about Western energy security. British energy giant BP this morning confirmed it would sell its 20% stake in Russia's biggest oil company, Rosneft. But of more significance to millions of UK households, soaring prices for petrol and electricity as this conflict rages. The UK's embryonic fracking industry, which could help boost domestic oil and gas production, has been frozen since 2019. Sites to extract shale gas were prepared from Surrey to the northwestern Scotland. They're now inactive. That's because, bowing to environmental campaigners, ministers say that fracking is dangerous and should remain illegal. As Western Europe contemplates life without Russian oil and gas, that view could change. War is always about military conflict by definition, but financial and commercial conflict feature heavily too. And that's our On the Money question today. East-West economic war. How are you affected? We're kicking off On the Money today by speaking to Francis Egan. Francis is the CEO of Quadrilla Resources, Lancashire-based oil and gas production company. Francis, great to have you with us back on the Money today. Now, Quadrilla is one of the UK's leading fracking companies. Your company has pumped tens of millions of pounds into the preparation of sites across the UK for fracking. You've employed in the past hundreds of workers, not least up in the north-west. To what extent do you think this is the right time to discuss any changes in UK energy policy? To what extent do you think that policy may now change?
Well, I think it's absolutely the right time, but it has been coming, frankly, for quite some time. You know, we have been saying for years now that the reliance on imports, and in particular Europe's reliance on Russian imports, is a policy failure. But we have been told by successive energy ministers that this is not the case, that we can rely on our foreign supplies of gas and that prices will be kept down. But we have seen, tragically, in just the last few days, how wrong this was. And it has emphasized how important it is, not just for price, which of course is very important, but for security of supply, to maximize your own domestic resources, be that gas, be that oil, be that wind or the sun or whatever it is. We should be maximizing the resources, not playing one sector off against another, and certainly not relying on Russia.
Francis, there's a lot of talk, particularly in the House of Commons, among Tory backbenchers, some Labour backbenchers too, I might say. They're not putting their head above the parapet. But there's talk about fracking being reinstated as a legal activity here in the UK, a legal activity. Tell us how the moratorium came about in 2018, 2019, and what it's done to your company since then.
Well, it came about on the back of a number of earth tremors when we were completing 2 wells in Lancashire. We weren't able to complete that activity. We did manage to show that the gas was there, and we also, contrary to some reports I've seen in the papers, flowed that gas to surface, so very high quality gas. But I think one earth tremor was felt. It lasted for about 2 seconds. The level of ground vibration was about half what's allowed from construction sites. And on the back of that, the government took the decision to shut the whole industry down across the whole country. Now, I would say this, wouldn't I? But to characterize that as an overreaction, I think underscores the case. And when we got the official technical reports, as you may have seen in some of the Sunday papers, no way would they have warranted such a decision. I mean, if that was the case, you'd shut down every construction site across the country, probably. You'd certainly shut down most of the London Underground. So I find it hard to believe that it was a scientific decision. I think it was probably more a political decision. And if it's a political decision, it can change when the politics change, and the politics most certainly have changed, desperately so.
So give us your vision, Francis Egan, of what the UK could become as an oil and gas producer if we were fracking, if we were pursuing our shale energy industry with the vigour that the United States has in recent years.
Well, the goal must be to produce all our own gas domestically. Gas demand, if the government's net zero policies are successful, will decline over time, but we will have gas required out 2050 and probably beyond, and even the Climate Change Committee acknowledges that. But if the demand declines, as we expect it will, then there's no reason we shouldn't be able to supply all our resources from domestic gas onshore and offshore. And that, of course, makes a huge difference. And that's the reason that in the US, gas prices are 5 to 6 times lower than they are here, because they're not reliant on anybody else. In fact, we're in the crazy situation where not just us, but the European Union are having to import shale gas from the United States across the Atlantic in boats, but are banning exploration and production of their own shale gas right under the feet. I mean, where's the logic in that?
We just saw there, Francis Egan, for those watching on television, we saw some pictures of your sites, your wellheads, places where Cuadrilla's been spending lots of money doing surveys and preparing wells for fracking. How many people did you employ in the UK before the moratorium, and how many could you employ if the UK really put fracking as a main part of its energy policy going forward?
Well, we had approximately 100 people just on involved in that one site that I think your viewers are seeing now, and that was just for 2 wells. So I think the Institute of Directors did a study that put the potential employment prospects, not just at the site, but there's a whole lot that goes on behind the site: technical jobs, IT jobs, financial jobs, marketing jobs, etc., at about 70 to 80,000 people. So clearly there are tens of thousands of jobs that can be created. There's potentially billions in tax revenue that can be created, and it's lower CO2 emissions than importing it across the Atlantic. So if you import it, you have no jobs, no tax, and higher CO2. Again, where's the logic in that?
Elevator pitch, as it were, to Boris Johnson. You got 30 seconds with the Prime Minister. What do you say?
Well, I would say save our gas industry. Don't rely on Putin and others.
Very well put. Francis Egan, CEO of Cuadrilla, who is campaigning for the end of the moratorium here in the UK on fracking in light of this Russia-Ukraine conflict. Let's turn to a friend of the show, Vicky Price. You're the Chief Economic Advisor of the Centre for Economic and Business Research. You used to run the government's economic service. You will have seen very important decisions of economic policy being made. You will have influenced them in your past, Vicky. Could it happen? Could the British government now move? The politics has changed, as Francis Egan just said.
It could. And of course, remember the whole of net zero, where, of course, everyone has been saying we mustn't invest any more in gas anywhere in the UK. But energy security has now become the really important part. And I remember when I was working for the government, when we were looking at expanding the nuclear capability of the UK, when we asked people, do you want nuclear? They'd say, no, not really. When you say, what about nuclear as part of the energy security and basically enhancing our energy security, then the mood changed. So we got much better results when we asked that question. And I think the emphasis has now moved to security rather than anything else. And so there is a possibility that...
So do you think if the government frames the question differently, it's not about environmental policy, it's not about the net zero COP26 agenda, it's about energy security, it's about the Western world remaining strong and resilient to stand up in the face of Russian aggression to back the nascent democracy of Ukraine? Do you think public opinion could be swayed?
I think it could, but the government could make a decision anyway. And in reality, when we looked at nuclear, the government, from an economic viewpoint, thought that it would make sense, and it did make sense. I think we all worked on it. I think it might make sense to do some more exploration of whether that will add significantly to the output that we produce. I don't know what the exact figures right now in the projections of how much it would ease the pressure. But we have had Rishi Sunak say that we're going to have to continue investing in gas because we need gas for the transition period. So somehow I think the mood may be changing. And that was just in the last, couple of weeks that he said.
And indeed, over the weekend, I was listening to Labour cabinet ministers on the television, and when they were asked about fracking, they didn't rule it out. That's a change as well. Vicky Price will come back to you later in the show. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we'll be joined by more expert panellists, including Director General of UK Steel and the Chief Economist at Argus Media. They focus on commodity markets and where oil and gas prices are going. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A wet day for many of us, particularly for Wales, northern and western England, where the rain will be heavy at times. Showers following for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland in the colder air behind this cold front that's crossing the country at the moment. And ahead of the cold front, East Anglia in the southeast staying largely dry, if rather cloudy, and fairly mild through the rest of Monday. But it's really across central, northern and western England where we've got the rain. Wales as well, and the rain turning heavier and more persistent, particularly across parts of Wales, southwest England, north and northwest England. Scotland, Northern Ireland feeling colder as showers follow, those showers falling as snow above 300 metres. But there will be some brighter spells away from the showers, and the rain doesn't quite reach East Anglia in the southeast until after dark. It then pushes through, and we keep the rain going into the southeast through the night. But it clears elsewhere, clear spells, and with lighter winds, a touch of frost in many northern and western parts of the UK, dipping to around freezing or just below for Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England, but staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius in the southeast, where it will be a dull and damp start with that rain clinging on right the way through much of the day, really, for the far southeast. It eases elsewhere before another spell of rain moves into parts of Cornwall by the end of the afternoon. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, North Wales, North Midlands, northwards, and temperatures reaching 8 or 9 Celsius, so a bit colder, but a bit more pleasant with that sunshine replacing the rain for many. Into Tuesday evening, the rain in Cornwall starts to edge north, so affecting much of southwest England and eventually South Wales. And Wednesday's looking like a fairly damp day for the southern two-thirds of the UK, just staying drier and brighter in the far north.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:23. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Now, it's war between Russia and Ukraine, but it's economic war between Russia and the West. The UK, US and now Germany say they'll throw Russia out of the international banking system known as SWIFT. But of course, Russian retaliation could have significant consequences, not least on global energy markets. I'm joined now by David Fife Chief Economist at Argus Media, which specialises in covering global energy and commodity markets. Thank you so much for joining us again, David, in the studio. Someone else coming back to On the Money, Gareth Stace, Director General of UK Steel, the trade association for the British steel industry, which employs tens of thousands of people in companies that, of course, use huge amounts of energy. Vicky Price is also with us, another friend of the show. David, let's go to you first. Thanks so much for joining us on The Money again. You good folk at Argus Media, you're constantly focused on commodity markets, not just for oil and gas, but wheat, corn, all the industrial metals that Russia exports, palladium, titanium, aluminium, bauxite, all the rest of it. What's happening to energy prices this morning? I saw that oil, Brent crude, at one point touched $105 a barrel.
Yeah, really, the whole commodity complex with exposure to Russia or Ukrainian exports shifted higher again this morning. We saw a little bit of a sell-off on Friday after the initial shock following the invasion, but we've certainly seen prices bid higher, and I think it's partly because of some of the measures that we saw discussed over the weekend in terms of financial sanctions from the West on Russia. And it's raised a number of question marks about, again, a topic you've been talking about already, security of supply. At the moment, there's a carve out from most of those financial measures for energy. So there's no suggestion at the moment that energy is going to be specifically targeted. But, as long as there's a question mark out there, I think markets are going to remain very febrile. Stocks are very low and the market looks very tight on a global basis.
Seeing, as you speak, David, we're seeing pictures of petrol, diesel forecourts across Britain. We saw some BP forecourts there. BP, of course, is disinvesting from Russia's biggest oil company, Rosneft. That's a British company, BP. We saw Shell as well in those pictures. Shell is an Anglo-Dutch company, lots of British ties. They also have huge energy projects, don't they? In the Russian Far East, in Sakhalin, gas extraction projects. Shell even helped to partly fund this Nord Stream gas pipeline that we talked about. When you look at futures markets, that's the price of oil and gas for delivery in months' time, in 2 months' time, in 1 year's time. Are we seeing the price pressures maintained as the market looks forward?
I mean, the bulk of the pressure actually has been on the prompt market, but the whole complex has moved up. The whole futures curve has indeed moved up. But really, the focus, I think, is very much on the prompt price, and we've seen that for gas, we've seen it for crude, we've seen it for refined products, and we're seeing it for agricultural products and so on. But I think you raise regardless of what the futures market is doing, you raise a very important point, because it may well be down the road that for Russia raising money for supply expansion projects for the next 3 to 5 years might well be much more difficult. So there are concerns, I think. There were already concerns about the levels of upstream investment in commodities post-pandemic. And I think this just raises more concerns about that, because Russia traditionally has been a source of relatively cheap energy, metals, and agricultural product supplies. So again, if we're going to be looking at other sources of supply, in some cases that's going to be more expensive going forward. So it plays into the inflationary argument yet again.
Gareth Stace of UK Steel, you represent the British steel industry. You're employing tens of thousands of people. We just saw some pictures there of Ukrainian cornfields because, of course, corn prices are going up, a staple food. We saw pictures there of British steelmakers. Your industry is probably amongst the most energy intensive, isn't it? That you use huge amounts of energy. And, of course, there is no energy price cap for businesses as there is for households.
No, and to give you some idea of how much energy we use as much electricity as 850,000 homes, as much gas as 450,000 homes. So, yeah, any change in the electricity price and the gas price really affects us and moves us from making not much money to losing money for every ton of steel we produce.
Now, a lot of your members, a lot of the businesses, not just steel makers, but just below you in terms of the energy intensive state, there are lots of manufacturers and so on. A lot of these factories are in those red wall seats, aren't they? They're in marginal seats, which the Tories maybe won in 2019 for the first time in a long time. They've got to retain those seats. Is the government listening to you when you lobby ministers and say, folks, we really need help with these energy prices, or we're going to see a lot of people unemployed in those seats where there's already a lot of lower income and vulnerable households?
Yeah, and actually I see it as really positive. The Prime Minister says he wants to level up, he wants a high wage economy. And I say to the Prime Minister, look no further than the steel sector. We employ 31,000 people. The majority of those are in those red wall seats, those level...
And they're relatively high-paid jobs, aren't they?
We pay our workers in those areas 45% more than the average wage.
Yeah.
So look no further than the steel sector. If you want to level up and you want to achieve what the government wants to achieve, even net zero, look no further than the steel
And as we saw on Teesside, when the Redcar furnace broke down, it was decommissioned. There's many other jobs linked to the steel sector. I think 1 in 4, for each steel job, there are 4 support jobs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've just made a really important point, Liam, that when a steel plant closes, that's it. The steel plant closes, you don't restart them, you don't build new steel plants. So every time there's a job loss in the steel sector, that's a job lost to our sector that isn't coming back. And conflicts like that we're seeing at the moment just add more risk to the steel sector, given, as you said, Liam, we pay an enormous amount more for our energy than our direct competitors in France and Germany, something like 61% more for our electricity than German steel makers do.
Wow.
It makes us uncompetitive.
Vicky Price, you and I on this show, all my other guests, we focused a lot, haven't we, on household fuel bills, but business fuel bills could really be the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you like, the kind of political catalyst for the government to make changes which try and rein in energy prices somehow.
Well, indeed, but of course that's an issue across the whole of the manufacturing sector right now. What we've seen is it's one of the highest increases in input costs that the sector has seen, and they have, up to a point, been able to pass those prices onto their in factory gate, if you like. Output prices are going up at the highest rate that they've done now for 30 years, which is extraordinary. Now, how can those be passed on, though, to the final consumer? And that's the real question.
Yeah.
Because
that's coming down the track, isn't it, Vicky?
Absolutely. And
with these inflation numbers we're going to see in future months.
I'm afraid so.
We're going to talk about that some more. Let's just go back to David Fife for a final comment from you, David. I'm reading about oil possibly going up to $125 a barrel, even higher. Is that fanciful? We don't want to be alarmist, but we have to be realistic.
I think a lot will depend on events over the next week or so. If we actually see moves by either the Russian side or, in terms of sanctions, in terms of a cut-off of oil supplies, then that could push prices significantly higher. What we're seeing at the moment is just a sort of stickiness in terms of flows, with shippers and banks being reticent about, providing money for flows to continue. For the time being, there aren't explicit sanctions on energy, but obviously, if that happened, then crude prices could go significantly higher.
And very, very briefly, David, the SWIFT banking system, it's absolutely vital in making global energy markets work, right? If Russia's not in SWIFT, how can it export oil and gas to Western Europe?
Yeah, for the time being, there are sort of carve-outs for energy. So, the US and the Europeans and Japan are allowing that energy trade to continue. But, a lot depends on events on the ground and whether sanctions tighten going forward. We wouldn't think they will, but of course it's a risk. And that's why crude has gone up as sharply as it has today.
David Fife, Chief Economist at Argus Media, thanks so much for joining us. My other guests are staying with me. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we'll be turning our attention back to fracking and focusing on why the UK needs to look at its own resources of natural gas as we talk about what this economic war means for you. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's due to speak to the Polish Prime Minister and G7 leaders this afternoon, before then flying to Poland and Estonia tomorrow. Efforts are currently underway to broker an immediate ceasefire, with delegations from Ukraine and Russia meeting in Belarus. Kiev hopes the talks will also lead to the withdrawal of Russian forces from the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked the European Union as well to fast-track Ukraine's application for membership.
We address the European Union to admit Ukraine immediately according to the new special procedure. We are grateful to the partners that they stand with us, but our goal is to be with all Europeans and, most importantly, to be equal. I'm sure that's fair. I'm sure we deserved it. I'm sure it is possible.
The UK Ministry of Defence says the bulk of Russia's ground forces are around 18 miles north of Ukraine's capital. Satellite images taken yesterday show a huge military convoy heading towards Kiev. The United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 500,000 people have now fled Ukraine. That follows news the UK is likely to follow the EU's lead in taking refugees from the country for the next 3 years. Boris Johnson's already announced immediate family members can join Ukrainians living in Great Britain. Russia's central bank has raised its key interest rate to now an unprecedented 20%. They're trying to shore up the currency, the ruble, which has fallen to an all-time low against the dollar following Western sanctions on Moscow. Well, they include the blocking of some Russian banks from the international banking system, SWIFT. You're now up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online, and also DAB Plus radio. I'll keep you up to date throughout the afternoon. Shortly, though, we'll be back to Liam and the money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan, on GB News TV and DAB Plus digital radio. Now, the West has imposed a series of harsh sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, not least cutting off a number of Russian banks from the international payment system known as SWIFT. But these sanctions could have damaging repercussions here, as Russia could instigate cyber attacks, security sources warn, or they could worsen the energy crisis by cutting off oil and gas supplies to Western Europe. What does all this mean for you at home? Well, from Pickering in North Yorkshire, we have Lorraine Allenson, and she is a pro-fracking campaigner. Lorraine, great to have you on the show. We spoke to Francis Egan at the top of On the Money today. He is the CEO of Quadrilla, as you know. What's your thoughts on that moratorium that the government imposed just a couple of years ago on fracking?
It needs to be lifted straight away. We need to crack on with this fracking because we're now very vulnerable. You know, there's three most important things for any government is defence of the realm, energy and food security. And our government is failing on all three issues of those. So the fracking, we need to get on because it takes a while to appraise what's below the surface and everything. And there was such a lot of propaganda used against shale gas, which was just nonsense. It was a made-up, as I say, it was propaganda. And there is talk that actually Putin funded the anti-fracking movement to the amount of 60 million in Europe. And even NATO, years ago, warned Europe that Putin was tampering with the anti-fracking movement, encouraging them and funding them. You know, they could foresee what would happen. And what we need is energy security. I cannot believe that we are closing, plugging and abandoning the wells over at PNR in Lancashire, and they are pushing the Oil and Gas Authority to abandon our onshore oil and gas industry that is conventional as well. And when I looked, I thought, why are they doing this? They're supposed to be the regulators of the industry and to ensure that we do have a good, secure supply. But when you look at their remit, our government has told them to reach net zero. Well, net zero will mean that we have no energy security, no oil and gas of our own, and we'll only end up, you know, importing from dubious regimes and at much higher cost to the planet due to the having to degasify and then regasify gas when it comes across in tankers and rely on people like Putin, who is a loose cannon completely now. Would you trust him? I certainly wouldn't. And fuel poverty will escalate. It's going to be dreadful. You know, I find that a lot of the eco-warriors are very wealthy. But what about all the ordinary people who are poor? They need support. They need affordable energy. Can you imagine if you're on the breadline now and your electricity and your gas is doubling in price, how on earth are you going to afford to survive? So yes, let's get cracking, let's get fracking.
Gareth Stace, turning to you, you represent UK steel industry, employs tens of thousands of people, still a major employer in this country, and of course we need steel for all kinds of things. What's your stance on fracking?
Well, from our point of view, as the steel sector in the UK, we would like to see more stable energy markets. At the moment, since September, perhaps, the electricity price has been up and down in the day, in the night, and it's been very difficult for us to plan production. So what we want to see is more energy security, which would lead to more stable prices. But what we really want government to do here is address the uncompetitive electricity prices that we're paying here in the UK that our competitors aren't paying. And in the last few days, we've seen those electricity prices go up against the gas price going up.
And a lot of manufacturers, even some steel makers, your bills are higher, aren't they? Because you have the renewable obligation. I know there's some exceptions for some very energy-intensive steel users, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the round, UK manufacturers, UK heavy industry, of which you're part, their electricity bills are higher, aren't they? Because they must add on to their bills subsidies that then go to the renewable energy sector. Is that right at a time like now?
We would say not. If we look at, say, steel producers in Germany, they don't pay those costs. The government recognises they need a competitive business landscape. Here in the UK, as you said, Liam, carbon costs, but it's not just carbon costs, it's energy tax costs, the carbon costs, the transmission costs, the distribution costs. They are loaded onto us as high energy users, not fairly, like literally, who's going to pay for them? The steel sector can pay for them. And that
But you're trying to compete internationally, right?
Yeah, steel is a globally traded commodity.
Let's turn to you, Vicky Price. You're very experienced when it comes to economic policy making in Whitehall, if I may say so. To what extent do you think this Russia-Ukraine conflict and the broader East-West conflict an economic war, if you like. Is it going to spark a wholesale rethink in UK energy policy when it comes to nuclear, when it comes to gas storage, when it comes to fracking, when it comes to those renewable subsidies that are loaded on, not just to households, but also to companies?
I think it may well do so, but of course renewable subsidies or renewable payments, if you like, are still needed because they will be part of the overall energy security. Because we will be producing energy in the UK, which will come straight into the grid. So we've got to bear in mind that this is going to be part of the mix.
From wind farms and solar and all the rest of it.
That will be part of the mix. There's no doubt about that. But there is an issue about the transition in particular. And I think until recently, the cost of the transition was underestimated.
To net zero.
To net zero.
Yeah.
I think there were loads of people who thought we could just do it without gas, without anything. But we now know full well that the wind doesn't always blow and you absolutely need the rest to be there for quite some time, and therefore we need gas more. Now the question is, how can we get ourselves off this international very high price that's there now? And no, we can't necessarily, but we're not dependent on Russia as much as others in Europe because we get any imports we get mostly from Norway. And there is, of course, a possibility that other producers will be prepared to give more in the short term, but we do need gas here in this country.
Of course, Norway is very important, but what's happening in Russia affects gas prices, which then affect us. So, Lorraine Allison, let's go back to you. How do you feel when you see the people that you call eco-warriors campaigning outside Downing Street, campaigning in town centres that they don't want fracking? What's your message to them?
They actually need to start thinking about the general population because they have very strong views and but they are well funded. I mean, you're showing signs there of Friends of the Earth. They have big green NGOs behind them, and they have a motive of their own. They have their own agenda. You've got Socialist Worker backs a lot of these groups, and their agenda. I mean, there was lots of Marxists actually campaigning in our area, but they were stopping us developing our own industry, and they're not actually benefiting the planet with their ideas of stopping us producing, because all we're going to do is import instead, because we're not going to stop using gas or oil, you know, for decades and decades. And it's a farce to rely on imports. So I'd like them to go away and think about what they're doing, because not only are they stopping our industry, and I think they like to think they're hitting big companies, they're hitting the poor people at the bottom of our country who are living on the edge of poverty all the time. And we need to be sensible about this. I find there's nothing sensible happening with politicians. They're not thinking straight. In fact, a lot of them are energy illiterate. You know, you've got to look after our own people and get their energy costs down, and the only way we can do that is to produce it ourselves. And renewables may be part of the mix, but they'll never be 100% of the mix. And you can't develop and build renewables without oil and gas. People fail to remember that.
Gareth Stace of UK Steel, I always know from 25, 30 years in journalism, the public's always ahead of the politicians. The public often tells the experts what's really going on, with all respect. You've just heard from Lorraine Allison there. Her and many people like her are developing a real understanding and knowledge of the energy complex. Would UK Steel back Labour's idea of a windfall tax on these huge energy companies, not least British energy companies, making enormous profits at a time when our energy security is under threat and ordinary households are really feeling the squeeze?
Well, what we'd back as the steel sector in the UK is any moves from government that would bring down the cost of electricity and gas for us, that isn't loading the costs of carbon and energy taxes onto us as a steel sector. So it's basically, you know, is this government behind a strategically important sector?
Including like a windfall tax? If the big energy companies, they're making tens of billions of pounds in profit, they can pay the renewable subsidies that your members are paying. They can pay them for now, at a time when there's this global energy crunch.
But what government needs to do is look at the long-term policy and the policy direction and say, you know, do we want competitive energy markets in the UK? If we do, then there's more to do than just a windfall tax, because we need to look for the longer term here. Because that's in the steel sector. You invest. You don't invest for tomorrow or next month. You invest for the very long term. It's a massively cash-intensive sector, the steel sector is.
And of course, British steel is important for British defence, right?
Oh, at times of war and conflict like this, it makes you realise how vital and strategically vital a sector like steel is to the UK economy. So, if this conflict went on much longer, and we were looking at, can we in the UK supply all of the steel that the UK economy needs, including for defence purposes, my fear, my concern is the answer would be no, we couldn't. And that's not a good place to be in as a little island that's now outside of Europe that does need to think strategic and think about sustainable and being self-sustaining.
Gareth Stace, Chief Executive of UK Steel, the Trade Association. Vicky Price, of course, friend of the show. Chief Economist at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. And GB News viewer Lorraine Allenson, pro-fracking campaigner, I should say, from Yorkshire. Thanks all for joining me. A fascinating and important discussion. Lots of you getting in touch with your views and concerns on whether the conflict in Ukraine with Russia will worsen the UK's energy crisis. Devon says, surely it's time to rethink British energy policy. We should be using home sources such as nuclear, fracking and North Sea oil, much more to keep the cost of fuel down and ensure energy supply security as we transition to a more secure, dependable and possibly greener sources of energy in the future. On whether we should be reintroduce fracking, John says, those tremors were insignificant. This anti-fracking position is unscientific and demonstrates, says John, weak surrender. But Joan disagrees with John. She says we shouldn't use fracking. We need to find a planet-friendly alternative. And Roger says the situation's obviously having a huge impact on our cost of living. The Chancellor could help us by removing 5% on fuel costs and reduce VAT. Yeah, scrap the VAT. That's what we say here on The Money as well. We must also become self-sufficient and forget all this green nonsense for the time being, says Roger. Keep your emails coming. We appreciate them all. Now, talks got underway in Belarus today between Ukraine and Russian delegates. Let's get the latest from our security editor, Mark White, who joins me now. Mark, you're a busy man. Tell us the latest.
Well, those talks are still underway, which is clearly to be welcomed. It's encouraging that at least they are still talking. It began, I think, the talks about a couple of hours ago in Gomel, just over the border between the Ukraine and Belarus. You can see the delegates entering there across this long table to speak to one another. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, said that he wasn't expecting much to come from these talks. I think everybody hopes that an immediate ceasefire, or at least a temporary ceasefire to, at the very least, allow the civilians in harm's way, in conflict zones, to get out of harm's way would be very welcome indeed. But no word at all on what they're talking about, what they may have achieved, but they're still going on, and that's encouraging. And the reason that there is such an urgent need for a ceasefire is because of the fighting that is continuing. A lower intensity around the capital, Kiev, overnight, but in the northeast of the country, in Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, there has been significant fighting in and around that city. And the city, according to local officials and government, the Ukrainian government, who put out images, has come under a barrage of rocket attacks, some very disturbing imagery that is being put out by the Ukrainian government, said to show a bombardment in Kharkiv. And according to the Ukrainian government, they're saying that dozens of people have been killed and hundreds have been injured. We have no way of independently verifying that, so we're attributing it, of course, to the source, and that is the Ukrainian government. It has sparked a massive humanitarian crisis which continues to grow. More than 500,000 now, we believe, have crossed the border from Ukraine into neighbouring countries, Baltic states, including Poland and Slovakia. As I say, 500,000 with 7 million displaced in Ukraine itself. and that humanitarian crisis will only grow, according to the Ukrainian authorities and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, who estimate that the displaced may well head for those border regions, try to cross to safety across the Ukrainian border. There are significant resources being put in place now by these Baltic nations to try and help this flow of humanity across the Ukrainian border. It is, as I say, a very worrying situation as the fighting in some parts of Ukraine intensify. In others, there has been, if not a lull, a lowering in intensity of some of the fighting that we've seen in recent days.
We've seen a big escalation of sanctions. Mark, of course, there have been Western sanctions on Russia since 2014, but they've really cranked up over the weekend and into this week. Do you think there's more to come? Do you see the Western alliance getting stronger? Or do you think there are signs that as the pain starts to bite for Western populations, for Western voters, not, of course, humanitarian pain, not military pain, but cost of living pain, which is also important, do you think there are signs that that Western resolve could buckle?
Not at the moment. It seems that those sanctions are going to be ratcheted up even more. If anything, I think the stance of NATO, of the European Union, of Western countries in general, seems to be tougher in terms of its approach, both financially and what is coming out verbally from politicians, and militarily in terms of course, the fact that NATO troops more are going to the eastern borders of the European Union to help out NATO allies there, not to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, we should add. But in addition to that, quite incredible that the European Union has now put hundreds of millions of euros into supplying arms direct to Ukraine, along with Germany, a watershed moment for that country that understandably since World War II has been very reluctant and careful about who it sends arms to now, directly sending 1,000 missile systems to Ukraine.
Mark, we've rightly focused on the military and humanitarian conflict while spending the last hour on the economic war. Thanks for joining me. We'll be back on the money tomorrow at 1 p.m.
Particularly for Wales, northern and western England, where the rain will be heavy at times. Showers following for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland in the colder air behind this cold front that's crossing the country at the moment. And ahead of the cold front, East Anglia in the southeast staying largely dry, if rather cloudy, and fairly mild through the rest of Monday. But it's really across central, northern and western England where we've got the rain. Wales as well, and the rain turning heavier and more persistent, particularly across parts of Wales, southwest, north and northwest England. Scotland, Northern Ireland feeling colder as showers follow, those showers falling as snow above 300 metres. But there will be some brighter spells away from the showers, and the rain doesn't quite reach East Anglia in the southeast until after dark. It then pushes through, and we keep the rain going into the southeast through the night. But it clears elsewhere, clear spells, and with lighter winds, a touch of frost in many northern and western parts of the UK, dipping to around freezing or just below for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, but staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius in the southeast, where it will be a dull and damp start with that rain clinging on right the way through much of the day, really, for the far southeast. It eases elsewhere before another spell of rain moves into parts of Cornwall by the end of the afternoon. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, North Wales, North Midlands, northwards, and temperatures reaching 8 or 9 Celsius, so a bit colder, but a bit more pleasant with that sunshine replacing the rain for many. Into Tuesday evening, the rain in Cornwall starts to edge north, so affecting much of southwest England and eventually South Wales. And Wednesday's looking like a fairly damp day for the southern two-thirds of the UK, just staying drier and brighter in the far north.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.